The jungle of Guadalcanal in 1942 was not a place where any soldier expected miracles. Most Marines who landed there only hoped to survive long enough to go home. But every now and then, someone appeared who didn't fit the normal image of a fighter. Someone who seemed almost invisible. Someone who could slip into the thick rainforest like a shadow and come back with information no one else could. This is the story of one such man, a man who could move through enemy lines as if they were nothing more than tall grass. Marines later described him as a ghost, a hunter who walked barefoot, carried only a rifle and a machete, and somehow always came back alive. They said he wasn't brave. He simply didn't understand that fear existed. They said he looked like a quiet farmer, but the moment he entered the jungle, he became something else entirely, faster, quieter, and more aware than anyone they had ever seen. But the truth was far more simple. He was a man trying to do his job and survive a war that didn't care about anyone it began during the Japanese counterattacks. In the humid nights of 1942, American forces were struggling to hold their lines. The Marines were exhausted, hungry, and terrified of the jungle around them. At night, the darkness swallowed everything. Even the sound of insects made the men jump. Many Marines admitted that they felt hunted, not by animals, but by the enemy that slipped silently through the trees. And in the middle of all this chaos, one Marine scout disappeared. During an attack, when gunfire turned the night into flashing bursts of orange light, he became separated from his unit. When the shooting stopped, no one knew where he had gone. Some assumed he had been killed. Others believed the Japanese had captured him. The officers only wrote one thing in their report: missing in action. But he wasn't dead. He had simply slipped into the jungle, crawling, hiding, moving like the trees were part of him. He had been trained as a scout sniper, someone who moved ahead of the main force to gather information. But no training truly prepared a man to survive alone behind enemy lines. He had only the things he carried: his rifle, 4 bullets, a small canteen, and a dull machete. As he pushed deeper into the rainforest, he knew 2 things would determine whether he survived: how well he could stay hidden, and how quickly he could adapt. The jungle didn't forgive mistakes. During the first day alone, he learned how close the enemy was. Japanese patrols moved constantly, searching for any sign of American activity. He hid under rotting logs, inside thick bushes, and sometimes in shallow, muddy pits. He didn't fire his rifle, not even once, because every bullet was precious, and noise meant death. Instead, he observed. He watched how the enemy moved, how many soldiers marched in each patrol, what times they rotated their guards, and which paths they used. Slowly, he began to map the enemy's patterns in his mind. He learned their rhythm the way a hunter learns the habits of prey. Food became his next problem. With no rations, he survived on rainwater, collected from leaves and muddy puddles. He chewed on wild plants he had seen native islanders use, carefully testing each one. Hunger made his body weak, but the fear of being discovered kept him sharp. Sleep was almost impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, a snapping twig or distant voice forced them open again. He wasn't fighting to complete a mission anymore. He was fighting hour by hour just to stay alive. On the second night, he climbed a tree to avoid a passing patrol. From above, he could see the flicker of Japanese lanterns through the jungle. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that he was deep inside enemy territory. Returning to American lines would take more than courage. It would take patience, instinct, and maybe a little luck. He decided he needed to move only at night. In daylight, he stayed hidden. The shadows were his shelter, and silence became his greatest weapon. As he moved, he also gathered intelligence. He memorized positions of enemy camps, machine gun nests, and trenches carved into the hillsides. He watched how the Japanese soldiers behaved, how alert they were, and where their weak spots might be. But the longer he remained behind enemy lines, the more dangerous his situation became. If he was caught, he knew what awaited him. Japanese forces on Guadalcanal were known for brutal treatment of prisoners. Torture was common. Executions were quick. And he was one man alone. No one would come to rescue him. On the third day, something unexpected happened. While crawling through tall grass near a ridge, he found the remains of a crashed American plane. The pilot was long gone, but the wreckage gave him a small advantage: a metal survival tin containing a broken compass, a half-melted mirror, and a few damp matches. Useless to most, but to him they were treasure. The compass helped him reorient himself. The mirror could be used as a signal if he reached friendly lines. The matches, though unreliable, offered a rare chance to boil water if needed. But his situation took a dark turn when he heard the sound of shouting. Japanese soldiers were closing in, searching with determination. He realized they had found traces of him, maybe footprints, maybe disturbed foliage, maybe a careless broken twig. He was now being hunted. With no other choice, he slipped into a shallow stream and let the current carry him. The cold water made him shiver, but it washed away his tracks. By nightfall, he managed to climb onto the muddy bank and rest beneath roots twisted like giant claws. He was starving, soaked, and exhausted beyond anything he had ever felt, but he was alive. As the night deepened, he looked up at the sky through cracks in the canopy. The moonlight filtered through like silver dust. Somewhere beyond those trees were his fellow Marines, fighting, waiting, hoping for reinforcements. And here he was, one man alone, carrying information that could save hundreds of lives if he survived long enough to deliver it. He wiped mud from his face, tightened his grip on his rifle, and whispered to himself that he would not die here, not in this darkness, not in this foreign jungle. He had a mission now: get back home, no matter what. And so, with 4 bullets, a machete, and a will stronger than fear, he continued deeper into the night. The morning sun rose slowly over the fishing village, but the warmth that spread across the rooftops did not reach Hiro, who sat on the steps outside the small house, staring at the ground. His clothes were wet from the seawater, his muscles ached from the night he had spent rowing between bodies, and his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who had seen more death in a few hours than most people witnessed in a lifetime. Yet inside his mind, the same scene played again and again, the huge shadow of the battleship sliding across the dark water. The explosion that shook the world, and the final moment when he felt his father's hand slip from his grip under the waves. He did not even notice his mother come out until she sat beside him. She didn't ask anything. She simply put a hand on his back. Her touch was warm, gentle, full of a silent courage she herself did not feel. She knew Hiro was carrying a weight that no one at his age should carry. Masako joined them, sitting quietly, the family bound together not by words, but by the shared fear of what would happen next. The sea that once provided food and peace had turned into a graveyard, and every sound of waves felt like the ocean whispering the names of the lost. Hours passed, but Hiro's thoughts refused to settle. Each movement reminded him of survivors he could not save. Faces he saw only 4 seconds before the current dragged them away. Hands that reached for the boat but slipped. The guilt sat heavy on his chest, and for the first time in his life, he wondered what kind of world they were living in. One where innocent people paid the price for wars they never asked for. When news of survivors spread, villagers gathered near the shoreline. Some families cried with relief when they spotted familiar faces, while others collapsed when they learned their loved ones were gone. Hiro tried to avoid these scenes, but they surrounded him. People kept thanking him, bowing deeply, saying he had saved more lives than they could count. But Hiro did not feel like a hero. He only felt the loss of the one man he wanted most to save. As the day stretched, unfamiliar men arrived, Navy officers. Dressed in formal uniforms, their expressions as heavy as the atmosphere around them. They asked Hiro to walk with them, and he followed quietly. They brought him to a shaded area near the beach, where several officers waited, along with 2 survivors he had rescued the night before. The officers saluted him. The gesture startled him. He was just a fisherman's son, not someone worthy of military honor. One of the senior officers stepped forward and thanked him for his bravery. He explained that the attack had been unexpected, that the waters had been too dark and too chaotic for their rescue teams to work fast enough. Hiro had done what even trained men struggled to do. He had crossed into the heart of danger and pulled out survivors without thinking about himself. Hiro listened silently, but the words did not give him comfort. He only nodded, keeping his eyes down. After the officers left, one of the rescued sailors approached Hiro. He was a young man, barely older than Hiro, with bandages around his arms. He bowed deeply, tears in his eyes. He said that without Hiro, his mother would have received a letter telling her that her son had died. Hiro didn't know how to respond. He only said he was glad the man survived. But the sailor shook his head. He told Hiro that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. Hiro had shown that strength. These words finally made Hiro look up. There was honesty in the sailor's voice, not shallow gratitude, but genuine respect. Hero felt something shift inside him, a small light amid the darkness. Still, the grief remained heavy, and when he walked back home, the weight of his father's absence filled the doorway before he even stepped inside. His mother was kneeling on the tatami mat, holding his father's fishing rod in her lap, wiping it slowly as if cleaning it would somehow bring him back. Masako sat nearby, quietly folding one of their father's old shirts. The room felt hollow, as if sound itself hesitated to enter. Hiro sat down, and his mother looked at him with tired eyes, the kind that carried strength through pain. She said that their father always believed Hiro was meant for something greater. He was not just a boy of the sea. He had a heart that refused to ignore suffering. Hiro lowered his head, tears finally spilling down. His mother pulled him close and held him tightly, whispering that grief was not weakness. It was proof of love. Days passed, and the village slowly returned to its rhythm, but nothing was the same. The fishermen launched their boats with renewed caution. Children no longer played near the water. Women gathered in groups, talking quietly about the sudden violence that had reached their peaceful shores. Rumors spread that more attacks might come. Some believed this was only the beginning. Hiro found himself unable to stay still. Every morning he walked along the shoreline, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger or distress. He repaired his father's boat, tightening bolts, replacing worn ropes, shaping new oars. Each repair felt like stitching together a part of himself. He knew he could not bring his father back, but he could continue the work that made his father proud. One evening, while the sky glowed orange, Hiro pushed the boat into the water. His mother and Masako watched from the shore, worry mixed with pride. Hiro waved at them and rowed forward, feeling the pull of the sea. The water reflected the fading light, like a path leading him to something unknown. As the boat drifted, Hiro felt a strange peace. The sea had taken from him, but it had also shown him something his own courage, something he never expected to find. When he returned home, a new group of Navy officers was waiting. They told him the military command had heard about his rescue mission. They wanted him to join a special coastal watch team to help guide patrols and assist in future emergencies. Hiro stood silent, absorbing their words. The sea had already changed him. Perhaps this was the next step in a path he never imagined. He looked at his mother. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes but pride in her expression. Hiro felt his father's spirit in that moment, as if the man who taught him to love the ocean was telling him to keep moving forward. And so, with a deep breath, Hiro agreed. Not because he wanted glory, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he understood now that sometimes fate chooses people who never expected to be chosen. And Hiro, the fisherman's son, was ready to walk the path placed before him even if he had no idea where it would lead. The following weeks unfolded like a slow tide, steady yet filled with silent tension. Hiro's life no longer followed the gentle rhythm of a fisherman's son. Instead, every morning he trained with the coastal watch team, learning to read enemy ship movements, understanding naval signals, studying the patterns of tides that could carry danger toward their shores. The officers were surprised by how quickly he adapted. Hiro's instincts, shaped by years of living with the sea, were sharper than most trained recruits. He could sense changes in the wind, identify currents without measuring instruments, and predict rough weather simply by watching how the waves curled. But even as he trained, Hiro carried the memory of the disaster with him. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the explosion, again the violent flash, the roar that shook the world, the burning wood falling into darkness, and his father's figure fading beneath the waves. This memory did not weaken him. It reminded him every day why he must stay alert, why he must not let another tragedy unfold if he could prevent it. The village continued to quietly transform. The once calm evenings were now filled with distant gunfire echoing from far-off battles at sea. Many families kept lanterns burning late into the night, hoping their loved ones would return. The air felt heavy not with fear alone, but with the strange mix of hope and uncertainty that war forces on ordinary people. Hiro still helped at home whenever he could. He repaired fishing nets with his mother and carried buckets of water from us, but his mind was always on the coastline, listening for signs of unrest. Sometimes he walked alone at night along the beach, feeling the cold wind whip against his face. He did this not out of restlessness, but because the sea had become both his comfort and his responsibility. One such night, while the moon cast a pale glow over the waves, Hero noticed a faint light flickering far offshore, too small to be a ship's lantern, too far to be from a fisherman. He narrowed his eyes and watched carefully. The light moved slowly, almost trembling with the tide. Hero's heartbeat quickened. He ran to alert the coastal watch. Moments later, a small team assembled, grabbing binoculars and scanning the dark ocean. After long minutes of silence, one of the officers spoke in a tense voice. The light was coming from a small raft. A survivor's signal. The team immediately prepared a rescue boat, and Hero insisted on joining despite the rough waters. The officer hesitated but agreed. Hero's experience on the sea made him invaluable. As the rescue boat cut through the choppy waves, Hero kept his eyes fixed on the fragile, flickering light. Every second counted. When they reached the raft, they found 2 injured sailors, barely conscious. One had a deep cut on his head. The other was shivering violently, his clothes torn from explosive blast damage. Hero pulled them onto the boat, wrapping blankets around their shaking bodies. He spoke calmly, reassuring them they were safe. The journey back to shore felt longer than the journey out. The wind grew harsher, and the sea churned like a restless beast. But Hero kept one hand steady on the sailors' shoulders, grounding them with words they could barely hear. When they finally reached the village, people gathered instantly. Lanterns glowed across the shoreline as the injured sailors were carried to shelter. Hero's mother appeared from the crowd, placing a gentle hand on his arm, relieved to see him return unharmed. That night, the commanding officer called Hero aside. He looked at the boy with a level of respect, usually reserved for men twice his age. He told Hero that his quick action had saved 2 more lives and that the Coastal Watch wanted him to serve as a permanent scout role typically given only 2 skilled naval men. Hero felt the same mixture of humility and heaviness he had felt since the first rescue. He nodded, accepting not the honor but the responsibility. The next morning, word spread across the nearby towns. More attacks had occurred along the coast. Ships had sunk, and survivors were drifting in unpredictable directions. The sea was no longer a peaceful boundary. It had become the front line of a war most villagers barely understood. Hero doubled his efforts in training. He learned to signal using lantern codes, to interpret smoke patterns, to estimate distance based on wave echoes. He memorized emergency protocols and practiced rowing through rough waters until his arms ached. But he never complained. He knew every skill he mastered meant one more life he might save. Meanwhile, Misako tried to keep life inside the house normal. She cooked simple meals, cleaned quietly, and often waited for Hero by the doorway when he returned late. She rarely spoke about their father, but sometimes Hero would catch her staring at the fishing boat, her eyes full of memories she kept locked inside. One afternoon, while Hero was patrolling the cliffside with 2 officers, he felt a strange stillness in the air. The sea was unusually quiet, the horizon blurred by a thin mist. Something felt wrong. Without warning, a deep, thunderous boom erupted from far beyond the mist. The cliff trembled beneath their feet. A second explosion followed, louder, closer. The officers rushed forward and scanned the waters through their scopes. Shapes began emerging from the fog warships, multiple, their silhouettes towering like mountains of metal. The enemy was approaching. Hero's heart raced. He signaled the alarm using the flare gun, sending a bright streak of red across the sky. The village below reacted instantly. Bells rang. Families grabbed belongings. Fishermen rushed to secure their boats. Soldiers scrambled into formation. But Hero couldn't look away from the sea. The war had finally reached their doorstep again, not as a single explosion, but as an overwhelming force. The lead warship launched smaller vessels, speeding toward the coastline. The patrol officers ordered Hero to return to the village for evacuation assistance. But Hero shook his head. He insisted he stay on the cliff to watch the enemy movements and direct signals. The officers exchanged unsure looks, but trusted him. Hero steadied himself, gripping the rail, forcing his breath to slow. He remembered his father's words, "When you face the sea, never let fear guide your hands. Use your heart, your eyes, your instinct." The mist thinned further, revealing more ships. The enemy formation was larger than anything Hero had imagined. From the village, he could hear people shouting, children crying, soldiers calling commands. Yet Hero's mind stayed sharp. Every movement of the enemy fleet mattered. Every second counted. He raised the signal lantern, and prepared the coded flashes. His hands were steady, his eyes were clear, and deep inside, he felt something rise, a courage that was no longer just born from grief, but from purpose. The sea he once feared had become the battlefield he understood better than anyone, and Hero, the fisherman's son, was ready to protect the lives behind him, ready to face the storm in front of him, ready for whatever came next. The enemy fleet advanced like a dark wall across the water, the rumble of their engines echoing against the cliffs. Hero stood firm at the edge, gripping the signal lantern tightly. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind stayed clear. He could not afford fear, not now, not when the lives of everyone in the village depended on the warnings he sent. He flashed the first coded signal toward the inland watchpost. Seconds later, he saw the reply flare rise in the distance. The commander had received the message. The defense units began to mobilize. Soldiers rushed toward the beach, setting up sandbag barriers and positioning artillery on the high ground. Meanwhile, villagers hurried toward the evacuation point. Mothers held their children tightly. Fishermen guided the elderly. And everyone moved with a mixture of panic and forced courage. Masako and Hiro's mother were among them. His mother kept looking toward the cliff, her eyes searching for Hiro's silhouette against the gray sky. Masako held her hand, whispering that Hiro knew what he was doing. On the cliff, Hiro continued monitoring the fleet. The enemy ships slowed their approach, adjusting formation into an aggressive line. Smaller landing crafts broke away, speeding forward like insects across the water. Hiro quickly flashed another signal. Multiple landing parties approaching the shore. The reply signal shot up almost instantly. The coastal defenses were ready. Suddenly, the first shell exploded near the far end of the beach, sending sand flying into the air. The villagers screamed, ducking low as soldiers shouted orders. The enemy had begun their bombardment. Hiro clenched his teeth. The sound reminded him of the night he lost his father. But this time, he did not feel helpless. He felt responsible. He felt prepared. The commander on the beach ordered the cannons to fire. A deep boom rolled across the water as the first defensive shot launched into the sky. It landed near one of the enemy boats, disrupting its path. Hiro signaled again, directing the gunners to adjust their aim based on what he saw from above. He had a better view of the fleet's weak points, and the commander trusted his judgment. Minutes later, the cannons fired again, this time more accurate. One of the landing boats burst into flames. The enemy forces shifted movement, trying to confuse the defenders. But Hiro kept sending signals, guiding the defenders like an extra pair of eyes. Just as things seemed to stabilize, an explosive boom startled him. A shell crashed into the cliffside, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Hiro stumbled, but didn't fall. Dust and rocks tumbled around him. Another explosion followed, even closer. The enemy had spotted his signaling position. They were targeting him. He knew he should move to safer ground, but if he left the cliff, the defenders would lose their advantage. From below, the commander fired a red flare warning telling Hiro to relocate. Hiro hesitated. He looked at the beach where his mother and Masako were being rushed inland. He could see soldiers guiding them away from the danger zone. They were safe for the moment. But if he left, the defenses would be blind again. He tightened his grip on the lantern. He stayed. Another shell hit the cliff, sending sharp fragments flying past him. One sliced across his shoulder, leaving a burning cut, but Hiro didn't stop. He lifted the lantern and signaled again, ignoring the sting of pain. The defenders fired once more, hitting another landing craft. But there were too many. The enemy ships were still advancing. Hiro's vision blurred for a moment, but he blinked hard. He focused. He steadied himself. Then a new danger appeared. One of the larger enemy ships opened its side panels, revealing heavy guns. Hiro's breath caught in his throat. These cannons could level the entire coastline. He signaled rapidly, sending urgent flashes toward the commander, heavy guns preparing to fire. The commander saw the message and shouted new orders. Soldiers pulled back to secondary positions, and the gunners redirected their aim toward the larger ship. But the enemy was faster. A massive explosion erupted from the ship's gun, sending a shell roaring toward the cliff. The ground shook violently as it struck just below where Hiro stood. The blast threw him backward. His body hit the rocky ground hard. For a moment, everything went silent. The world blurred into spinning colors. The sky, the sea, the smoke. Hiro tried to move, but pain spread through his ribs. He coughed, tasting blood. The signal lantern lay a few feet away, cracked but not completely broken. He crawled toward it, each movement slow and shaky. He reached out and grabbed it, forcing himself to stand again. His legs trembled beneath him. His vision wavered, but he raised the lantern once more. He flashed one last important message: enemy main gun reloading. The commander understood immediately. The defensive cannons fired at the massive ship with all remaining ammunition. The sky blazed with fire as the shells flew. One shot missed. The second hit the side armor. The third penetrated deeper, and the fourth exploded near the ship's ammunition deck. In a blinding flash, the enemy warship erupted into flames, rocking violently as secondary explosions shredded its hull. A cheer rose from the defenders on the beach. The landing boats panicked, scattering in confusion. The remaining fleet, seeing their largest ship destroyed, began to retreat. The attack was over. The village was saved. But on the cliff, Hero felt his knees weaken. The lantern fell from his hand. His body swayed as exhaustion washed over him, heavier than any wave he had ever faced. Below, Masako saw him and screamed his name. Soldiers and villagers rushed up the path, climbing the cliff as fast as they could. Hero's mother ran ahead, despite the steep climb, her breath shaking with terror. When they reached the top, they found Hero on one knee, breathing weakly, his clothes torn and dusty. His mother fell beside him, holding his face in her hands, tears spilling over. Hero managed a faint smile. He whispered that everyone was safe, that the village had survived. His mother hugged him tightly, her tears falling onto his shoulder. Masako held his hand, begging him to stay awake. The commander arrived moments later, saluting Hero with deep respect. He said that, without Hero, the entire coastline would have fallen. Hero looked at the ocean, the waves glowing in the afternoon sun. For the first time since his father's death, he felt peace. The sea, which had taken so much from him, had also given him purpose. He took a slow breath. His mother's arms held him close. Masako's voice whispered his name again and again. Hero closed his eyes, not from weakness but from calm. The storm had passed. The village was safe. And he finally felt his father's pride in the wind moving across the sea. The fisherman's son had become a guardian, and his story would be remembered for generations.